So the thing that gets to me about being misunderstood as an autistic or an AuDHD person, autistic and ADHD, a certain percentage of the time, maybe half the time, I'm not even too sure, I don't even recognize that misunderstanding while it happened or when it's happening. I just kind of realize it after the fact. It might be a few moments after the fact. It might be a few days after the fact. Somebody took something the wrong way. They didn't understand me fully. Maybe they added subtext to what I was saying and there wasn't any subtext. These are all versions of being misunderstood. And then when I realized that that thing happened, maybe I kind of realized that their face did something and, oh, they took something that way. I'm realizing that maybe at 2 a.m. in the morning, and then I have to analyze what everything was said and why that happened in order to hope that it doesn't happen again, avoid that happening in the future. And then there are the times that we do realize at the moment or close enough to that moment that we could maybe do something, but then figuring out what to do that doesn't make it worse somehow, that can be a lot. And that can be pretty exhausting as well. Miscommunication, of course, happens to everybody. It happens to all humans, no matter what your brain is like, no matter what neurotype it is. But the frequency at which it happens, how it happens, and that aftermath, that line up at 2 a.m. in the morning, wondering what went wrong, how it happened, and how to avoid that in the future. That's a special thing that's kind of reserved for us who are autistic. What I believe is there in that aftermath part is something that we call rejection sensitive dysphoria, or RSD. That's at least what I think it's happening because it sure feels the same. So the term came from a clinician who was working with ADHD adults, and it refers to a reaction that is from criticism or disapproval or that rejection, even just the sense of those things happening and the reaction that the human has to that thing being quite outsized from the event, the actual thing that was said or happened. And that's true for a lot of us. Like if we look at what the thing is logically, we know that logically how we felt afterwards or our reaction didn't really align logically with the thing that we experienced. So RSD isn't a diagnosis. You aren't going to find it in any the DSM manual for diagnostics or anything like that. And the research on it is fairly thin. There isn't a ton of it out there. And from what I can tell by experiencing this thing myself is RSD, the actual reaction that we have is remarkably similar to the reaction that we have from being misunderstood. And the reason that I feel this is that the idea that we have, the thing we said, being misunderstood ourselves is, in a sense, like a rejection. Our ideas being misunderstood or rejected, our lived experience sometimes is being rejected in a way or criticized in a way. Everybody's just a little bit autistic. That's one that I heard just a couple hours ago, and I had a reaction that is remarkably similar to the reactions that I've had from RSD. And when I look at those things and I think about, well, why did I react that way? It's because we oftentimes, it's very personal what we're sharing about ourselves. And so if we are sharing something that's personal and it gets rejected or misunderstood, then we can relate that to our person because that's what it's about. And in a sense, we are being rejected through our explanations of ourselves being rejected. And that's why I think there is a fairly strong link, quite possibly, between being misunderstood and RSD. So I have a lot of training and certification in nervous system regulation. And one of the things that training brings up time and time again is a lot of times our nervous system, our reaction to a thing, our nervous system reaction, that thing can happen before the logic. So something happens and we might react to it before we even really consciously know what's happening. And that's because our nervous system can react to threats. That's what it's actually designed to do, to keep us safe. So if we are registering something like a criticism, a rejection, that sort of thing, our nervous systems could very well react to that threat because that's what it senses it is. So we might have this big reaction to that threat that shows up before our logic can even arrive to deal with it in a different way, perhaps. So we might practice and spend a lot of time, a lot of effort trying to catch this thing in time so we can deal with it with logic instead of our nervous systems showing up first. But that can be easier said than done. So how I've kind of dealt with this myself is realizing that I can be proactive about things and kind of prepare myself in advance, knowing that this thing might show up at some point, or I can deal with it afterwards. It's going to show up or it already has. What am I going to do in response to this reaction? So let's think about ADHD and autism. These are two different things a lot of times in how we react and how we process. So the ADHD, the descriptions of ADHD are oftentimes about fiery, quick sort of responses. And now the autistic side, oftentimes we're looking at a little bit more processing involved. It might be slower processes or a longer realization period to kind of work out what was being said because, again, we're speaking different languages. So I'll describe what just happened to me this morning. I had a conversation. It was activating. I had to process what was actually being said underneath it all. I was asked actually in that moment how I felt. I literally did not know, but it took some time to realize what was said, what was meant, and then I could sort of start at that point to process how I actually felt about that thing. All I knew in the moment is I didn't want to be there. That was all that my brain, possibly my body, gave to me at that time. So that's what we are dealing with sometimes. In that case, it was a sense of rejection and RSD that came up. But for me, in that particular moment, it was delayed. It was something that I experienced about 30 to 60 minutes after that time, once I had some help processing that experience. So the other thing that might happen is that you can get both of these things happening at the same time. So you might have kind of that ADHD flare in the moment, something that happens really fast, and then you might process it after that point and realize something different and feel a different way. So there's a lot of different ways that these things might be experienced. So what I'm going to describe in this next part is that internal spiraling thing and what you might do to be able to help it. So if you do have something in this category of being misunderstood and then realizing it later and maybe ruminating on that experience, these are some things that might be able to help you out. But of course, everybody's experience and contexts are going to be quite different. So this first one might be useful if you do catch a misunderstanding happening in the moment. So maybe it's something you already know and understand, oh, this is what they are saying. And that doesn't align with my experience, and they definitely don't understand my experience or what I'm saying. And in this case, you know, and you might be able to make a decision in the moment. So one thing that I've found is just, do I want to respond to this thing or not? Now, in the past, I would have always defaulted to explaining myself. I'm being misunderstood. They don't get what I'm saying. I want them to understand what I'm trying to communicate. I would explain. I would probably overcorrect in this case for me. And that tended to, in my experience, at least make things worse. So I've taken on something new, and that's to have this sort of predefined thing in my mind that I can choose not to do that. It's taken me some practice, but that I don't need to have them understand Some people are just not going to understand. Usually when I course correct and over explain, it doesn't result in them understanding me better, or this might just be something that you don't experience at all. But if you do, it might help to have kind of a strategy going in for this. Do I need to explain what's going to happen if I'm misunderstood in this context with this person? Does it matter? Do they need to understand me? And then when you do, say, hit that misunderstanding, then you can decide, do I want to correct this with a short statement, or do I need to do a much longer one? Or do I just let it go and decide later? And sometimes if you don't fully understand what's going on, you sense that there's a misunderstanding, but you're not too sure about it yet, maybe that third one is the best answer for you. I will put a pin in this and deal with it later, because a lot of times there are ways to do that by other forms of communication or at a later date when there's maybe less emotion involved, whatever that is for you. So preloading that you have some options there and what they are, so you don't have to try to figure that out in the moment when there's a misunderstanding and an activated nervous system, that can be helpful as one possible option. Now, there are a couple gotchas. One I already kind of mentioned is that you do have to be able to catch this one in the moment. So that's not always going to happen for every scenario. And the other one is if the reaction is very large. So if it's a very big RSD reaction, the nervous system might be too activated for you to even sort of choose or process one of these options. So the next one here is the delayed realization. This one's the most common one for me. It's not really being too certain in the moment. You might kind of sense that there's a misunderstanding or something isn't quite right, but you don't fully process that until maybe 30 minutes later or even 3 hours later. So at this point, we only have choices about how we're going to move forward with this. Like, how much processing are we going to do? Are we going to ruminate over it and cycle over the same thing over and over again? So this is where we get to make that decision about how we're going to process the thing and then what we're going to do about it. So for processing, this is something that helps me, is it's to set up like this time limited session, right? So it might even go in your calendar if you want to formalize it. You get to choose how you're going to do that. You can choose if you want to make a voice note, if you want to write something down, if you want to journal about it. There's a whole bunch of different options for how you best process. This is going to depend on what works for you. And then you get to decide what you want to do about it. So it goes everything from having a full conversation to not bringing it up ever again. So this is really going to depend on the context, the safety amount. Do you have to, is it like a work situation that you do need to work out with somebody? Is it a more casual situation where you can just let it go and move on? But the biggest thing that I want to sort of communicate here is it can really help to make it time limited, because at least for me, I can think about things way too much, and then I'm making it worse just for myself at the end. And it's not very helpful to just spin over the same sort of thing. So set up that time, like a little container of time, figure out the best way you have to process something, and then just put a stake right there. What am I going to do about this? And then sort of commit to that thing. The other thing that can help is sometimes putting a little bit of space between the conversation that happened, where you got activated, and actually doing that processing. This will differ for everybody, but sometimes at least spacing it out by 3 or 4 hours or whenever you feel regulated later on is a good decision to make. Now, that's going to be checking in with yourself to try to even tell if you're regulated, and if you have limited interoception or alexithymia, that can be challenging in its own. But try to set a time based on history if you can't tell in your body whether or not you're regulated. And also, before I go, I want to say this is very difficult work to do. I make it sound maybe kind of easy in this video, but it's not. It's going to take a lot of checking in with yourself, thinking about your history in these situations to figure out what's going to be best for you to do. So what I've just noticed for myself is that The thing that makes things the easiest for myself is letting some of the things go that I can, the things that are safe to let go of, the things that don't really move the needle, being fully understood anyways, that it's okay to let those things go at times. Now, this, of course, isn't going to work for everything. It's only going to work in certain contexts, and it might not even be right for you at any times, but it's being conscious of those things and making those decisions ourselves with our own autonomy, how we want to play things out. That can give us a lot more of that autonomy. That can be quite empowering for ourselves. And then we can end up helping ourselves be less dysregulated, be more regulated more often over time. And I think that is a useful skill to have, at least. That's it for this episode. This is Wired Divergent. I'm Jen deHaan. I have a website linked in the description with a newsletter in it so you can get updates about what's going on. And I also offer coaching one-on-one. It's going to be going asynchronous. Those options are coming up soon. So check it out at jendehaan.com. Bye for now.